Good morning, everybody. We are here at Letchworth State Park again. This is our second time doing a sunrise vlog here. The first time we did it was back in February, and it was near the Inspiration Point overlook, and it was freezing, although we did have some amazing conditions, but it was absolutely freezing. Now today I find myself in a completely new spot that I've never shot sunrise at before. I pulled in at the entrance I normally come into, which is the Castile entrance, because it's right next to the archery field outlook, which is a spot I've photographed a lot over the years. Like, I'm talking, I've probably photographed that same angle or around that angle probably like 20 times. And today I wanted to try to do something new, despite the conditions being really good. And that's always like a bit of a dilemma that I come into when it comes to this type of stuff, where it's like, do I want to risk experimenting on a new angle that I might not like, and when there's going to be really good conditions, right? When I could, have shot those really good conditions at an angle that I know I like. It's kind of like, I guess, gambling it, because, I don't know, that's just the way I look at it. So today we're taking a chance on a new spot. This is the Hogsback overlook. I think it's called that just because this ridge out here kind of resembles that of a hog's back, I guess. And I think there's like a really old juniper tree out there. I think it's like 6,000 years old. I'll put the actual date up on the screen here because I probably got it wrong. But yeah, this is the angle we're going for. I got the camera set up here, aperture priority, f10 ISO 64 is the settings currently. And the only thing I don't like about this spot is right in front of me here. You can see that it is completely just covered with lots of tall brush and trees. So it's hard to get just an uninterrupted view of this area, which is something I'm not a huge fan of, but we're just trying something different today. So another local photographer recommended I come to this spot here and check it out. And I'm kind of glad I did, just because I've never photographed here in the morning. So I feel like I have to have come here at least once, and today might as well just be that day. We'll be going to other spots in the park a little bit later on, because there are some clouds on the horizon. And I don't know if we'll get really good fire skies this morning, but when the sun eventually does break the clouds, we might get some pretty good light on a lot of the other nice spots here in the park, which we might go and try to photograph. I still haven't really worked out what those spots are going to be. I might go back to archery field to try to get a pano, which we talked about in the last vlog, where we were doing the Milky Way. So yeah, I'm just going to continue shoot brackets here till after sunrise, and then we'll probably be moving on to a new spot. Okay, so I think I'm actually going to set up for a pano, because instead of trying to zoom in to crop out all of the branches and the trees, I think I'm going to try to embrace all of those things in this composition and try to do a pano to get it all in this entire view that I see, instead of just one little cropped section of it. And I think it'll look better. I just took a sample panoramic on my phone, which is a really neat feature. Always use your phone first before your real camera. It helps you get a good idea of what the shot will actually look like before you have to bust out a bunch of gear. So yeah, we're gonna give the pano gimbal a shot here, and hopefully leveling the tripod will be nice and easy. I'm sure it'll, just like it always is. And what a fantastic sunrise that was. It definitely exceeded my expectations, and here is the final result. It is a panoramic photo that is about 6 photos stitched together, and I gotta say again, I'm pretty happy with it. The settings were ISO 100 at 24mm f11, and the shutter speed was 0.4 seconds, although it obviously varies with each panel of the panoramic. But yeah, that's the shot. And stick around till the end of the video when we go over the post-processing. Alright, so we wrapped up our shoot at the Hogsback, and I gotta say it was a success. We started to get a lot of really nice colors on the clouds, and just some nice light overall. And I think the pano idea is going to work out pretty good. And speaking of pano, we are at Archery Field now, and we are doing some panos here at sunrise. The sun is pretty high in the sky. It's pretty intense, as you can probably tell just by the light on me right now. I didn't want to come here and just get one shot, you know. I like to come here in the morning and get like a couple different things, because sometimes the best shots aren't always just at sunrise. You can get better shot past sunrise, or later than sunrise is what I mean to say. I used to think otherwise, but I've come to learn that thinking that way is kind of flawed. There are definitely lots of opportunities for other photos after sunrise and after golden hour, etc., etc. So I'm going to continue to walk around here a little bit, explore a little bit more, and try to get some more shots. And I forgot to bring the other batteries for this camera, so I don't know how much longer I'll be able to vlog for, but I'll try to bring you guys with me on as much as I can. And really quickly before we move on to our next location, here is just one of the photos I got from Archery Field. I was going to do a pano, but I ultimately just didn't like it at this particular time of day. So I ended up using just one of the panels from the pano that I was taking and got this really nice moody shot pointing off into the distance. And there's something about it that I really, really like. Can't really put my finger on it, so I figured I'd share it here. There are the settings for the shot, and we'll go over the post-processing when we get back to the studio. I don't know if you guys can see that, but there is a huge turkey vulture down on the end of that wall over there. It's days like today where I wish I had a long lens. That is so cool. A little bit later, I decided to make my way down to Middle Falls just because I was curious to see what it would look like with the light sort of shining directly onto it. I haven't really experimented too much with shooting the Middle Falls at sunrise, so I went there, took a couple of shots, which we'll go over those in Lightroom when we get back to the studio. I haven't really worked with any of these photos yet to completion, but I think some of them look pretty cool. Very dynamic lighting, and I think using that harsh lighting to our advantage here to kind of make a really cool, contrasty, and dramatic shot. Alright, so I think we are going to call it a day here at Letchworth. It is almost 9 a.m. And if I'm being honest, I'm actually glad I stayed a little bit later, because some of the shots here I got of Upper Falls from a pretty close-up angle I actually really like. Especially like with the harsh lighting, it honestly makes the photo look a lot more dramatic. And I'm kind of excited to see how it actually turns out. I have another close-up falls shot that I took from a slightly more head-on angle that I titled Ethereal Falls. I'll put that up on the screen right now. But this photo that I just took is a little bit more in line with the waterfall. Very excited to see how our Hogsback pano turned out as well. Pretty pleased with it. I think it's going to be a promising shot. I think the pano will definitely help the photo out a lot more than the single frame was going to. We'll just see how it looks when we go ahead and put it all together in the studio and post-processing, so I'll see you guys then. All right, everybody, welcome back to the studio. It is time to go over some post-processing from our recent sunrise trip to Letchworth State Park, and I gotta say, very proud of some of the images we were able to pull, especially our Hogsback pano, which is great. It's always a good feeling when you go to a location for the first time and you pull something really good out of it. I think I got kind of lucky with the conditions that we had, and that last minute decision to do a panoramic photo, I think, is what really saved that image. And you guys will see what I mean when we take a look at the raw files here in Lightroom. I also stopped on my way out of the park near Inspiration Point. I was originally stopping to use the bathroom, and before I got in the truck to leave, I looked in towards the woods and saw some really nice light breaking through the tree line. So I went in there, tried to grab a couple photos. I don't think any of them really worked, but it was worth a shot, right? That happens to me a lot sometimes. I'll go here in the morning, I'll get my shot that I was planning on, and maybe a couple others, and then I'm trying to leave because I'm hungry, I'm tired, and I'm just thinking, you know, there's a lot of just really nice looking things around here. I ended up stopping at different places after places and staying a lot longer than I intend to, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So let's go ahead and hop into Lightroom here. Okay, so the first photo we're going to take a look at is what my original composition was going to be. I originally thought I wanted to be zoomed in to kind of crop out as much of the surrounding foliage as I could to really make the gorge and all of the features down below, like the river, the sky, more prominent in the photo itself. And you can see here, it does not look too bad. I think if we had some fall colors, it would really help to give, I think, a little bit more interest into the frame, and it would kind of separate the green foliage here from all the foliage out in the distance there. But like I said, it ultimately just wasn't working out for me. So I decided I zoomed out a little bit to maybe incorporate some of the trees and the branches around it to kind of frame it in. And at that point, I was like, you know what? Why don't I just go all in and go for a panoramic photo? Because as I was standing there, your eyes have a pretty wide angle already to them. And just from what I was seeing in my own perspective, I was really liking the way all of the trees were positioned around me, the foliage below, all the various different types of plants, and who knows if any of them were actually wildflowers. They could have maybe have been in bloom earlier in the summer, and if that's the case, that could make for a really, really good shot earlier next year in the summer, something I'll have to keep in the back of my head as something to remember, where we can sort of redo this shot, and if we have wildflowers in the foreground, I think that would enhance this image tenfold. So we ended up embracing, like I said, that idea of doing a panoramic because I just really liked the view that I was seeing, and I wanted to show you guys, the viewers, the people I was going to share the photo with, more so of what I was seeing in the actual moment as opposed to what my camera was just able to see without doing any sort of panoramic stuff. And this is one of the first stitches that I did for a pano. This one, as you can see, isn't as wide as the one you guys saw earlier because I think at a certain point, after doing so many panos back to back, I ended up miscounting and doing one extra frame on a couple of the panos, and it was a pretty happy accident considering the fact that I liked the way it looked a bit more with some of the tree trunks that were on the far left side of the frame. I felt like it just balanced the image a bit more, and this is a pano that I didn't edit, but you can see up in the top here, those clouds are really starting to catch the light. And that's when I started getting really excited because I was seeing all the clouds on the horizon. I was like, you know what? Are we going to get some light up on the clouds here? Because I think that would really help the image and help to bring sort of that center part of the photo where you're peering through those trees out into the great open. It would really draw the eye to that, to have those really nice colors. And we got super lucky that that ended up being the case. So where are the ones that I ended up going with? Yeah, it was right here. It was kind of a battle because I like the way the clouds look in that other one you guys saw just a few moments ago. But as you can see here, this pano has that extra panel on the left, and we can see these 3 tree trunks here on the very, very far side of the photo. I'm not really sure what it is off the top of my head, but having that little extra bit of foliage and trees there, making the image just a little bit wider, I felt like it really helped the shot. So I'm glad I accidentally shot one extra panel to my left because I really, really like the way it looks. And I think it kind of puts this dominant tree right here, this oak tree, sort of right on the third of the photo, or at least close to it. And maybe that has something to do with making the image a little bit more visually pleasing. So we ended up taking both these panos. We had one that was sort of more properly exposed for the highlights, which is this one right here, and one that was more properly exposed for the shadows. And I want to show you why I did this, because this photo right here I think was a -1 exposure, and this is something I think that might be exclusive to the Nikon Z7 or maybe just mirrorless cameras in general. But if you take a close look here at the shadows on this tree trunk, you start to see a lot of noise, but you also start to see these weird vertical lines that are showing up. And I believe they showed up in some other frames as well. And I think that's just a product of, I'm not sure again if it's exclusive to the Z7 or just mirrorless cameras in general, and really, really dark areas that you try to bring up the values a lot on. But you can see here on the one that we properly exposed for the shadows, you can see that problem is pretty much 100% gone. So I was glad I was able to resolve that here without any issues. So that's that. Now let's head into Photoshop to show you guys how we put it all together. All right, so here we are in Photoshop with our two adjusted panos from Lightroom. One is exposed for the shadows and the other is exposed for the highlights. So let's go ahead and put this whole thing together. First thing you might notice is the fact that we really didn't do a lot to this photo to get to the end result. And that's always a super great feeling. Anytime you have to spend less time editing means you can spend more time taking photos, right? So that's always a plus. And you also kind of have to learn when enough is enough when it comes to editing a photo, because again, sometimes less is more with certain shots. Sometimes they need more. Really, again, it just all depends on what you're working with, right? And as the more you edit photos, the better you'll get at realizing, when you need to stop and when the image is done, right? And sometimes you need to know if you can push it just a little bit more. So like I said, we have our two adjusted panos here. We have our foreground exposure and we have our highlight exposure. And pretty much all I did was just do a very simple hand-drawn mask of where I wanted to bring in those adjusted highlights. I was going to do a luminosity mask, and you can even see here in the channels tab, I did do a couple different highlight masks, just clamping them down further and further, all the way to highlights 4. I think highlights 3 is probably what I would have used if I had to choose, because you can see here, it's really only selecting these really bright areas where it would then drop in the adjusted highlights over everything that's pretty much 50% gray or higher to 100% white. So decided not to do that though, just because there was a little bit of movement in the clouds and it did look a little weird after trying to blend it in. So all I did again was just a hand-drawn mask. And luckily, nothing else moved here in the tree line that made it super difficult or obvious that it was blended like that. And the only thing I did pay attention to as far as blending was the tree here, because blending out the weird lines on the tree was definitely something I wanted to make sure I did. So I ended up doing that. And that was pretty much it for the blend. Very, very simple blend. Not much needed to be done there. Yeah, that was pretty much that. So after that, we put it all together and we got a Color Effects Pro layer on there. I think I added some Pro Contrast, a little bit of polarization, and I think I might have done a skylight filter, which adds just a little bit of a sort of an orange reddish tint to some of the highlights and warms up the photo a little bit, making it look more like you're getting some of those orange sunset or sunrise colors over your image. And anytime I do apply that, I apply it at a very, very low percentage, like 8 to 12% at most. Sometimes like I never go higher than that. But, depending on the image, you might want to go higher. Again, it's all personal preference. But didn't really do much there. As you can see, this is before, this is after. And then we added a little bit of midtones contrast. And that reminds me, I probably should just go ahead and label this so I know what it is for future reference. Just some global contrast in the midtones there. And the nice thing about that, it gives a little bit more of a pop to your image without worrying about clipping shadows or highlights, because it's only affecting the midtones, which is super awesome. And then here, this is something that I try to do occasionally to some photos. I think there is something to be said about intentionally brightening up certain areas that are your subject to help kind of draw the eye into that certain part of the photo, whether it be dodging and burning, which I didn't really want to do here because there isn't like so many specific things in this photo that really scream, opportunities for dodging and burning. So all I did was a little bit of a gradient mask here using this reflected gradient, just so I could get a steady, consistent line across the center of the image here. And I'll turn on this here so you guys can see where I applied this sort of little bit of gamma to the center of the photo. And you can see as I toggle it on and off, it just brightens up the main subject of the area, which is exactly what I wanted to do, because it's, why we were taking the photo in the first place. We wanted to come photograph this ancient gorge carved by glaciers 10,000 years ago. Super impressive, super vast, awe-inspiring expanse. So I wanted to do something that would help draw the eye to that. And this is a very plain and simple way of doing it, right? Because it brightens up that area, draws your eye right to it, and simultaneously it darkens the bottom and top of the frame, which helps for a couple reasons, because again, it draws your eye in. And these are areas that are generally going to be darker anyways, right? The more you come in to the tree line, it's going to get a little bit darker. And as we get to the top of the sky looking up, it's also going to get a little bit darker the further you look away from where the the sun is coming up. The brightest areas of the sky during sunrise are going to be roughly near the horizon, so that kind of helps with that as well. Next up, I just added a simple high pass filter at 1.8, and if we zoom in here, you can kind of really see it putting in the work. There's with it off, and there is with it on. Just a decent amount of sharpening, and it isn't going too crazy on these really distant things, which do look soft naturally, and that's fine just because it's really far away. But I think the subtle difference the high pass filter makes there is acceptable, and it would have been a nightmare to just kind of mask it in over this and kind of leave it like that. Although I could have, it wouldn't have been that hard. It just wouldn't have been like a super perfect mask, which I guess it doesn't really need to be. Then here I did a little bit of hot pixel cleanup. I think there was one right here. Yeah, right there you can see. And there was a couple other around the image, mainly in this sort of area where it was a little bit darker. So got all of those out of there, at least many as that I could find in the time that I was looking. And then the last thing we added was a signature right there at the bottom. Always nice to sign your photos, definitely should, because they're your work and you should put your name on them if you're proud of them. And yeah, that's all we did to that photo there. Again, there's the before and there is the after. Really not a big change there, but you know, sometimes subtle changes are better than big massive changes. And I also don't think I illustrated this well enough earlier, but you can see this is why we ended up blending in highlights from a lower exposure bracket, because you can see here these highlights in these clouds were super hot and they're definitely blown out, and then all the detail information there is just completely gone. And we blend them in, we get like 95% of it back. So just another reason for exposure bracketing and the importance that serves in landscape photography. So again, one last sort of before and after. Now let's head back into Lightroom and take a look at some of the other shots we got. Okay, so here's the second photo that we ended up working with, and this was taken at the archery field overlook. And I don't know what it is about this image. Again, I said it earlier. It's just something about the lighting in this photo that I really, really like. It's got an aesthetic to it, and it just, you know, appeals to me. I don't know what else to say. I just really, really like it. I kind of like the way there's this soft sort of orange warm tones in the very distant sky. And as you can see here, it kind of has this like sort of soft, dreamy atmosphere the farther out you look. I don't know if you want to call it haze, whatever it is. Really just a vast viewpoint. And this wall, I normally wouldn't like it, but I feel like it's kind of a little bit of a leading line. It doesn't lead directly into the frame, but it does kind of draw your eye a little bit forward out there, and I kind of like it for that reason. And as you can see here, the highlights are really, really intense, so we do have to do some exposure blending. But there's also like a little bit of a light ray that you can kind of see there, and that I also like as well. I'm a huge fan of those anytime you can see them. So we have two exposure brackets. Well, we technically have three exposures that we're going to be blending. We have our shadows, and we have our highlights, and then we have like our super highlights here, which is mainly just for this segment of the image where we get a lot of that information and detail back. I even went one stop down further here where we can almost get the full shape of the sun back entirely. I decided not to end up using this one because I don't think the photo needed it. I think I could stop it there because this has a little bit more brightness to it, a little bit more sort of drama to it, and I wanted to keep that as opposed to having the refined shape of the sun. So I ended up going with this one. So yeah, those are the images in Lightroom here, and you can see I added them accordingly. And now let's hop back into Photoshop and take a look at how we put it together. All right, so here we are in Photoshop with our second image, and let's go ahead and talk about how we put it all together. A quick before and after to start. This is just our adjusted raw, straight out of Lightroom, and this is the final result. So let's talk about everything I did to get there. Also, I have a question to ask you guys. If you guys want to see a detailed editing video going over my workflow for landscape stuff or astro stuff, whatever it may be, feel free to let me know down in the comment section below, and I'll do a video where I just walk through an entire edit and show you how I do everything instead of showing you what I did after the fact. That might be a little bit more useful. Going to be a lot longer video, but if you want to see it, feel free to let me know. So here we have our adjusted foreground from Lightroom, and we have our adjusted background or adjusted highlights from Lightroom as well. As you can see, those highlights, they're a little too hot, so we ended up creating a luminosity mask to blend in those. I think that was that -2 exposure. Might have been a -3. No, it was a -2 exposure. I think I shot a 7-step bracket for this just because the lighting was really intense. And we put it into that highlights mask and then just brushed in exactly where we wanted that to be, how much of it we want it to be. Not the entire image, just a small portion of it, which is that little segment right there. And you can see the difference before and after. It really helps to fix that really blown out spot. And then we did a little Color Effects Pro. I think all I did was some Pro Contrast. Got to be one of my favorite things. A little polarization and a little bit of, I want to say it was a classical soft focus, or it might have been the sunlight filter just in the sky, because I think it gives a little bit of a dreamy, soft look to it, which I think it enhances the mood of what I was going for with this shot. And then here, I did a little bit of a gamma reduction, sort of bringing down the luminance of the highlights in just the sky here. You can see before, after, bringing back a little bit more detail. And then here we did a little bit of mid-tones contrast, a little global contrast there. Always like to do that. Didn't need it, maybe not. It's just a habit that I get into. Sometimes I like to do that. A little bit of color correction here, using this adjustment layer. What is that called? I think it's, yeah, the color balance adjustment layer here. Just made some changes in the midtones and the highlights. You can see there in the magenta and the yellow, and then the midtones more magenta and more yellow. And I think it really helps to kind of tone down that really intense green that you kind of run into in the summertime when you're shooting a lot of green stuff. And you can see there's the before and there is the after. I think it makes it a little bit more of a neutral, more natural looking color, at least in my opinion. And then we have a little bit of a gamma reduction in the foreground. I did this to make it a little less distracting, to help draw your eye into all of that scenery out there in the distance and make it a little less distracting. Some object removal. What did we remove? Good question. There was a ton of insects out flying, enjoying that early morning sunlight, and they kind of create these little speckles here as they hit that light and kind of, flash like, I don't know, like dust in the image, I guess. And just ended up getting rid of all of those because those will definitely show up in print and stuff like that. So to get rid of them, I felt like was the thing to do. And a high pass filter of just 1.8 over the entire image, and another object removal here because I ended up missing a weird sort of rainbowish lens flare right there in the sky, and there's before, there's after, and then just a signature on the bottom to wrap it up. So that was that photo here. Now let's go back into Lightroom really quickly to take a look at some of the other angles and shots I took while I was out and talk about which ones I liked and why I liked them, and, vice versa, why I didn't like some of them. All right, so this is sort of near where I saw that turkey vulture from, if you guys remember earlier on in the video. And I was right up against the wall here and just looking down into the gorge. And the nice thing about this gorge being a gorge is you have some really dramatic lighting down there. Sometimes the sunlight doesn't hit all aspects of it, so you get some pretty intense shadow crawl, which might be make or break for some people, but I think in this particular case, I think it helps to enhance like the mood and the depth of this particular gorge. I think over here the depth is like 550 feet, so I think it really helps to enhance that. So I decided to shoot a little pano, and I was like, I really like the way this looks. It's not something that I would edit and for say put up for sale as a print right now, because I feel like this could be taken at a different time when there's better clouds, better lighting, etc., etc. And I think it can make for a really, really solid image because you have this sort of T-table plateau taking up this third of the frame and the river going right through it there, and the way the two sort of fit together, and then the corresponding outer bank here that kind of wraps around. And maybe it could be a multi-row panel where we do one sort of 5 degrees up and get a little bit more sky depending on what the sky looks like. And I think this here, a little bit of foreground, I think adds to it as well. I don't mind it so much, especially if it's in the fall maybe, and there's a lot of leaves here that have fallen from the trees. I think that might add to it as well. The stump we could probably get rid of in Photoshop, so that's not such a big deal. But it's not a deal breaker by any means. But I think this is a potential little spot right here, doing a small little pano. And I think I was zoomed in at 50 millimeters here, so I was zoomed in just a little bit. I think going a little wider, you get too much of the bottom here, and I don't really like it. And I think zooming in a little bit helps to get you a little bit more into the gorge here to see some of the details, and that's kind of what I was going for. Then moving on, we have this pano that I took at a viewpoint that is just down the trail, the main gorge trail from Archery Field, past where we saw the vulture just a little bit, maybe like 5-minute walk at most. And I like this vantage point for a pano of this sort of tea table, as some people call it, more so than you would get at archery field. I don't think panos work there so well because this rock face, you're kind of looking directly head on to it, and your camera's like parallel with it. And when you do a pano, I think it kind of just naturally warps it, and it looks just not super natural. Where when we come down a little bit to the left of this, you can kind of see a little bit more down the gorge to the left and still see down a ways a little bit to the right. And I think because it's at an angle, the pano works a little bit better. It looks a little bit more natural and not so much distorted from doing a pano or even shooting super wide on like a 10 millimeter or 12, 14 millimeter lens, whatever it may be. Then we went down to Upper Falls, or Middle Falls, I keep getting them confused, where we took this shot here. And I do like this photo. I haven't done anything with it yet because I don't know if I like it better than my sunset shot I did here called Twilight Trail, which is such a favorite composition of mine now. I want to go back and reshoot it when conditions are promising to see if I can one-up it, which I'll put that photo up on the screen really quickly. But this photo doesn't really work for me at the moment. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe when fall foliage hits, I'll like it. I'm not sure. But this is something to maybe revisit at maybe a different time. But for now, I think we'll just leave it here. Then moving on, we had some photos of just the Upper Falls, where we have this photo here, which I do like quite a bit. I've done some edits to it. I even did a mask here on this side of the image where I took away some dehaze, some negative dehaze to kind of make it look more ethereal, a little bit more soft where that mist is catching the light. So I like this one. I have one that's a little bit more zoomed out. I think going even wider here or maybe doing a pano would probably benefit this so you're not cutting off the waterfall and maybe getting the sky in it too, like doing maybe a multi-row. My lens just isn't wide enough. You can see I'm already at 24 millimeters and, you know, some things are getting cropped out, which I'm not a big fan of. And then we have some more zoomed in stuff right here. And this is actually a black and white shot, which I really like. The shutter speed isn't super long, so you're actually seeing you know, more action in the water, and I really like that. I think that helps pair with the dramatic lighting that we had to make it just look more active all around. And again, the same sort of focal length here at 70 millimeters. I just ended up pushing the waterfall to the right a little bit to get this rock face sort of on the 1/3, or at least as close to it as I possibly could. And you have the really bright side of this photo paired with the really dark side of the photo on the left. And then I ended up going, like I said, to the woods to try to get some shots here. And I wanted to experiment with some intentional camera movement where I was shooting this little section of woods here. Here's just a regular photo. I think, again, this photo would benefit maybe from some fog, some rain perhaps, maybe fall foliage, maybe the light being a little softer. But I was like, you know what? Because I've always been thinking about doing this. I've seen other people do it. So I wanted to introduce some intentional camera movement. I think this looks pretty cool. I don't know if I'd do anything with it yet, but it's something to kind of try to experiment with in the future and keep in the back of the head. And this is also another photo that I got on the side of the road on the way back. Really cool windmill, black and white, road leading your eye into the frame. Maybe I'll do something with this in the future. I'm not entirely sure. Oh, and really quickly before we wrap things up, I ended up going to Letchworth just a couple days later for sunrise again, and we had some thunderstorms and rain rolling through the area. I thought it was going to be a complete bust in terms of a photo shoot, but look at this image we got here. I haven't finished it yet. I'm so excited to finish the edit on this. We had some fog, some insanely dramatic looking clouds, and we even ended up getting some great color in the distant clouds there towards the south. I mean, it was an incredible morning. Just the atmosphere that I felt being there, it was something else. It was so peaceful, and I can't wait to share with you guys the experience when I post the photo to my socials. And I'm just so happy with this photo and the conditions we had that day. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And until next time, we'll see you guys later.